and I think we are glad to hear that India is going to come up with numbers on the table, because I think many of us have been concerned, about India's role and India's projection of what we are going to do. So thank you for your, for giving us kind of an update on what the situation is as far as INDC is concerned. May I throw the floor open for any questions? We can take 2 or 3 questions before we break for tea. Yes, please.
Thank you, Chair. We had a lot of information and technical details about the prospects in COP20, but it would be good to have some perspectives. Most speakers said that it requires political commitment, and which is very hard to come by in these negotiations. Anybody who has seen the book of Anthony Giddens on politics of climate change, he says that these negotiations are not bringing anything. Any amount of negotiations are not going to solve the climate change, because he said it is a transgovernmental matter, and the negotiations are carried out in an intergovernmental manner. So these negotiations, it's like the disarmament negotiations. You talk of more disarmament, but you end up in more rearmament. You see? So what is the point? What do you really expect? Because the negotiation, that is the position. So politically, we're not going to solve it. Yeah, negotiation is politics, mitigation is science, and adaptation is an attitude. So what are we expecting from the negotiations? It's not a very optimistic scenario. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If there are any questions to Mr. Sudhir Sharma, because I think he would want to sign out. So first, 1 or 2 questions which anybody may have directed to Mr. Sudhir Sharma so that he can respond. Yes. Yes, sir.
Hi Sudhir, this is Arjuna from the Center for Science and Environment. You mentioned that for India, peaking emissions around 2040 or 2050 would is out of the question. I mean, it's something that you don't consider possible. But if China is saying that they're likely to peak around 2030 and they are not given an exact date or a figure, then considering that in many developmental parameters and indices, India is say 10-15 years behind China, isn't it almost like expected that India would peak in the 2040 to 2050 decade and not before that?
So did you heard the question?
Yeah, I got it. Should I answer now? Or
let's hold on. Let's collect more questions.
Any other burning questions? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Sudhir.
That's a very good question, and I'm not saying that. India is at a stage where it can actually peak in 2030 as China has, but there are 2 things one need to keep in mind. First is that we should not look at the level of development and the future development that is needed. That is definitely needed, and then say that if in the past that has been the time frame which countries have needed to peak, that is what the time frame would be required in the future. Just to give an example, if I come freshly into a market to buy a telephone, I don't think I'm going to be buying a mobile phone which was available in 1990, because it's not available anymore to me. The point being that technologically things have advanced, and so essentially the incremental growth that you see coming up in the next line of countries, even without any kind of an effort, can be achieved at a much lower rate of emissions. So that definitely helps in peaking earlier than what one would anticipate if one were to look purely at the past. So that is one point. The second point is, we will get to a stage where there will have to be, and there will be a much severe pressure of reducing at a much faster pace as the impacts of climate change become more and more apparent and much more costly. So in that particular, and that is the point I was trying to make, that in that particular perspective, for India to make a statement that we would peak in 2050 actually would be a kind of a political harakiri, or putting in and bringing up the much more larger pressures on it to take action. What would be much more prudent and I think constructive would be actually to say that India would like to peak earlier, and this is what India requires to enable it to move to that peak at an earlier date. And that helps both in terms of creating a leadership, saying that actually we are not waiting like the others to peak when we can, but we are looking actively to collaborate and find ways in which other countries can help us to peak much earlier, because we do recognize the requirements of science. So that is the point I'm trying to make. It would be best for India, in my perspective, to put up these two numbers. It doesn't require to, but it would be good to put up saying that what its long-term strategy is, and in that context put up how it is looking at short-term plans, both in terms of what it can do and what it needs to be, what it could do much further if support is provided. And also I'll kind of answer slightly the first set of questions which was on the politics. Very right. The issue is largely mitigation, and how do we get the ball rolling on mitigation? And a lot of these negotiations actually, like the US-China, will take place outside the UNFCCC process, and they will be brought back into the UNFCCC process. So in a way, the way I see the INDC text, I think a lot of these negotiations have already taken place, because this INDC text is not going to get changed much in Lima. So yes, there is a political discourse going on, because I think most of the capitals do recognize that it is an important issue to be addressed, and they also recognize at this point in time economies are in still a fragile state, and not a very strong action can be taken by many countries.
Okay. Just hold on.
Yeah.
Is it related to this? No. So we can. Okay, Sudhir, thank you very much. Enjoy your day.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Sanjay.
Thank you.
Have a nice discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ajita. Bye.
Okay, questions, yeah.
Just a couple of observations, if that's okay. Yeah, okay. My name is Nagaraj. One is that I think sometimes we shouldn't lapse into the danger of feeling that this US climate deal has finally made a kind of breakthrough in negotiations. As it is, it's basically because of the weakness of what's happened so far, or rather that nothing much has happened. It makes people look at it quite positively. In fact, even the EPW editorial that's been distributed with the pile of papers has that tendency. Yeah, it's quite dangerous lapse into that. I mean, if I look at the numbers, 2031 could make estimates, but just only the US and China combined could be in the range of about 17 to 20 billion tons a year, two of them, if you look at the rise. I mean, US might decline, even if it meets its pledges to about 4.3 billion tons, but Chinese rise on average each year in the last 10 years has been in the range of 600 million tons, average rise each year. Alright, it reached about 8 billion tons, latest data is available. So even if that rise comes down to about 350, 400 million tons, because it wants to go away from coal or because it wants to have 20% renewables, etc., which includes nuclear, but let that be. Even if it's a reduced rise, it will be nitro, exactly. Even then it will be in the range of about 14, 15 billion tons from China alone. You add 4.3 to the US, talk of the range of 18-20 from US, China alone by 2025 to 2030, okay, which is more than what the Earth can absorb. And that what the Earth can absorb will likely go down by 2030. There's one sort of broad point I want to make. Secondly, one brief point, because there's so much talk about the numbers, about the way that methane is calculated. And here I don't mean the political point that Soumya talked about the numbers, but simply in terms of the global warming potential. It's usually measured for a 100-year period at about 23 or 25, you're going by Kyoto. Yeah, but if you look at the radiative forcing of methane since 1750, and then look at the rise in simply units of methane since 1750, actually the GWP, the global warming potential compared to CO2 is not 25, but 54. So the numbers actually then proportionally increase very significantly. And somehow we need to think of that in our calculations itself, in our basic calculation.
Just first we just get all the questions on board, then you can respond. Yeah.
So My question was basically on the fact that a lot of speakers have sort of alluded or pointed to the fact that political will is basically missing from the larger negotiations, right? But what I didn't hear from any of the speakers was actually how do you crank up political will? A lot of the things that have been said in the first round have been things which we've known since before Copenhagen. Like if you look at the larger civil society engagement within these climate negotiations, we've heard similar debates since 1990, since the convention that the developed countries need to do more, we need to increase mitigation potential, things like equity need to be operationalized. What I didn't hear from a lot of speakers and from like the comments that were made is how do you really practically engage with these discussions rather than actually just pointing to the fact that political will is lacking. So all the questions about the debunking of the US-China agreement and it not being good, I'm not saying that it's adequate, I'm not saying it's good. What I'm trying to say is the political will ball needs to start rolling, and at least with this announcement, it creates that sort of momentum to a certain extent. Whether it's adequate or not, maybe not. But I'd like to get to know what speakers would like to think or have to suggest about how to crank up the political will.
Yeah. Any more questions?
Well, just one clarification to Indrajit. He mentioned about most of the US funding, 3 billion coming for private sector, and we might have a problem with country ownership. Now, as far as my knowledge goes, if any money goes into GCF, there is a designated authority in every country. There is an NI process. Money from GCF will flow through NI, and they will be regulated by or monitored by a designated authority. So there will be a country ownership to that extent, and there will be institution who will be monitoring it. So would like to seek your views on how do you see, if it would have been a bilateral agreement between countries, I agree that it's between private sector, one corporate talking to another, but I think this is more about contributing to GCF, which is more governed by countries or parties to COP.
Okay, may I ask the speakers to perhaps respond as well as make your final statement?
I think some of the questions that are observations that have come up, most are observations, but still some points that have been made, and the question raised before Sanjay mentioned is about how do you make this lack of political will. In fact, I think it's not only about the civil society. In fact, most of the responses to what needs to be done or not being done regarding climate action has been looked at through the climate lens. And if you like the first observation, question that the person who left, he raised that political will is not there, that is said, and how it is done. I think if you look at even China's own action, it's also a clear pointer. China's action of reducing coal is not governed by, basically governed by climate concerns. It's basically as a response to China's own middle and upper middle class really standing against the huge amount of air pollution. I think even the US action is not out of consideration of global climate concerns. In fact, the amount, if you recollect, 10 years ago, the US public perception about climate change was less than 50% positive. And that has changed because of the Katrina and others. So one challenge is how to shift this from the climate lens to what people actually feel, see, and which is more tangible. Like even if something is triggered by climate change, the effects are not seen often as climate change. Effects are seen by something else. That's one. And the second, Naga's observation, I didn't understand the question, because the question of methane is very well known. The methane in shorter term, even it's been calculated global warming potential as 100 times CO2's potential. It depends on what is the time frame. And the points I raised is, in most of the calculations, the fugitive emission of methane is not actually taken into account. So if you take this into account, then even the figures and the emission gaps will go up.
No, I wasn't responding to your fugitive point. I was really saying that this 25 times of GWP is simply an arbitrary figure under the Kyoto Protocol. If you take the figure since 1750, which is what the benchmark we take for many of the most important calculations, and weight is 54 times, not 25 times.
These are known figures. If you extend it to 100 years, it comes down to 22 or something. So these figures are known. This point I didn't understand in the larger debate, because that's a point that many of the figures, which I raised also as a general observation, many of the figures that IPCC has put up are really not what will be the raw science data. So that's a very critical consideration, because our actions are even lacking in tackling what is put up as official data. And if the official data itself is already diluted in some extent, in some areas, then actual action needs to be much more. But the general question, no one has the real answer. Now, how do you mobilize political action? Now, whether a climate march will mobilize political action, or real bad situation in the countries will mobilize political action, that's a question which nobody has a ready-made answer to. So unless the situations develop, and if we can really hold on to, latch on to this, like to a certain extent China's action, as I said, is not driven by so much on climate. It's very clear. And China basically is responding because over the last 15 years they have built up their capability for solar. They have built up the largest base of solar manufacturing, which India has not done. So they are now in a position not only to promote their own solar energy, which is of course very little, but to serve the global market. So they are seeing very clearly some of the products will go down. So solar will be their next big export market. So that's very clear. Unless China promotes solar, how are they going to capture the global solar market?
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Nafisa. Just 2 or 3 points I thought I'd make. The first is with regard to the political will question. I think we are all engaged in one way or another in trying to galvanize political will, whether it is of our own governments or internationally through our alliances of other governments and of the negotiations as a whole. And that is a process which I think will continue. I just want, however, to make 2 points. One is, I think it's easy to be cynical about these processes. And I think it's important for us to be more optimistic about the influence that we think we can have. If we don't, we might as well go to sleep. And I say this because for all its weaknesses, the US-China announcement, China's announcement, while it is largely responsive to domestic pressures, let's not also minimize the PR value of these announcements and the impact that that has of wanting to make a good impression on the world. And I'm sure when India responds to this with whatever number it comes across, it's not driven primarily by a climate consideration. It's a PR idea. If China has done this, what should India do so that we make a good impression in the international community? These are factors that work. And I think civil society groups could leverage such perceptions and take advantage of those. But I think the second thing that is required is that regrettably very few or almost none today proposals on the table reflect what we were talking about, which is the common concerns responding to climate of the science, of the politics and of the ethics. What are those numbers? And if those numbers come forward a little more strongly in order to put pressure on the 2 degrees goal, then I think that makes a little further this task a little more purposive than just howling in the wind and saying this is not enough, what you're doing is not enough. One should be able to quantify this better. Something like what the emissions gap report does at a global level, I think one should be able to do this at national levels to assess adequacy in terms of fairness, equity and the science. I think that would give this impetus and give it more force. That's the second point. The third point that I wanted to make is with regard to the adequacy and the targets. I think it is necessary for us to focus a little more sharply on that. I can understand why people would have some comments, reservations about this or that aspect of the IPCC report. Somebody says the methane is not reflected properly. Somebody says that something else is not reflected properly. I think if one is talking about tactics and strategies of mobilization, there should be some things which all of us can agree on. If all of us continue to disagree on everything, then I think it becomes very difficult. If we can't sit across the table and come to some agreement, then what is the prospect of making governments and the UNFCCC negotiations agree? My suggestion therefore is the IPCC report and the numbers it throws out are on the basis of discussions among scientists. I don't think there has been cases where there has been serious disputation on the numbers by particular governments to say, no, don't say it's 49 gigatons, say it is 80 gigatons, or say that it's 30 gigatons. I think if one can take, let's put our own individual preferences on this or that subject to one side, we can continue to debate those. Let's launch a platform based on some common agreement, and I think the IPCC represents the best possible consensus of scientific opinion that is there among us. Let's take those numbers to start with, move that as a platform, and then go ahead. And I would argue similarly about numbers for mitigation targets going forward. Let's also be clear, IPCC's target in the 5th assessment report for 2100 is predicated on targets for 2050 also. And those targets are 15 to 30 gigatons annual emissions by 2050. And it makes very clear that if this is not achieved, then targets for 2030 will not also be achieved. And I think if we take a minute to reflect, now or later, one would come to the conclusion that a target of 15 to 30 global gigaton carbon dioxide equivalent emissions is not a bad target to shoot for. One could argue whether it should be 13.5 or 12.9 or something, but I think as a ballpark, if one takes that figure, it's a good target to go with. It's consistent with what has been argued till now, and on the same basis, I would think let's proceed with an agreement on what the broadest consensus is, and then proceed from that further. Thanks.
Yeah, to respond to Sanjay, so like I mentioned that apart from the initial resource mobilization, which is a more political issue, the GCF is right now at a very technical and process-oriented state. And there, one of the controversial issues is got to do with the private sector facility. So in the discussion so far, and they are still working out the mechanics of the private sector facility and how they should be involved. So the push from the US is to draw on rules from the MDBs, for instance, or to set in place the IFC standards in place. And that is a concern for developing countries as to it should not be seen as clashing with the country ownership principle on which the GCF is premised. So I hope that sort of clarifies.
Yeah, no, that clarifies. Basically, my question is more in the context of, I think what you are saying is that in terms of, we need to have, basically fight need to happen at the GCF level, while all the modalities are being spelled out. But let's not, let's not give due credit to US. I think they deserve a credit that they have contributed funds in GCF. Now, GCF need to have right kind of modalities that ensure country ownership, that ensures private sector get their share, but that ensures money is then that goes to the public sector for adaptation, etc., etc. So I think that's what my understanding is, and I think you are validated on that. Thank you.
Okay, I think we've come to the end of the session. I would like to thank the speakers very much. I think what we've gained out of this session is, well, two broad things. I think one is at a very specific level in terms of what are the sticky issues that we are going to face now in Lima and coming up to, Paris. But I think we also, I think what we got out of the session were the larger mitigation concerns. And beyond that, what what could be, what should be the perspective and perhaps very practical steps as to how we need to look at the solutions as we go forward. So I think that is an important thing. And the of course the politics of it, it's always elusive right from the beginning, and I think that's always a challenge, and we as NGOs have always to be engaged with it. I don't think we have any other way but to engage with the politics of the situation. But having said that, yes, the ethical aspects are extremely crucial, and how do we then play this role of bringing ethics and politics closer. I think with that, we will close this session. If we can just take a 5-minute break. Ajay?
Maybe 8 minutes.
8 minutes.
Not more than that.
Good. Okay. 8 minutes. 8 minutes break, and then we come back for the next session. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.